Hello, my name is Christine Sokaymoh Frederick, and I'm the Executive Director of Dreamspeakers Festival Society. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to Digital Dreamspeakers, our new online series that will showcase our programming that was originally scheduled for our festivals, but now will live in a new frame online. We'd like to thank all of our festival team for their enthusiasm to bring this programming to you in this new platform. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, Edmonton Arts Council, Bell Media, Urban Programming for Indigenous Peoples, Indigenous Services Canada. Please take a look at our website, dreamspeakers.org, and our social media platforms where you'll be able to see our upcoming schedule of events, videos as we release them, that will include programming such as performances, workshops, watch parties, and podcasts. So take a look, and we look forward to sharing our dreams with you on Digital Dreamspeakers. Hi. Thank you so much for joining me today. I would like to share with you some tips, some guidelines on how to write a grant proposal. It's incredibly important when we as creative people have ideas and we know what we need to do to create, but sometimes it takes a totally different skill to have that creativity funded the way it deserves to be funded. So I'd like to share with you how to write a grant or how to fund your work. The first thing you need to understand is that it takes a different skill set. You might be a dancer or a painter or even a writer, but it doesn't mean you necessarily know how to convey your project in a way that will get funded, that will get noticed, will be seen as a great project to fund. So I'm going to go through a few things with you on how to do that. The first part of writing a grant should include your search and research of your funders. There are many potential ways to fund an art project, but some of the first places you should look would be our public funding of art. And in Canada, we have 3 different ways to do that. One is your municipal funder. That's the city funder. Here in Edmonton, we have the Edmonton Arts Council. They are a part of the City of Edmonton, but a little bit of an arm's length. So they have a more capacity to adjudicate your grants quickly, the way they see ethically, and then be able to fund you efficiently. The next level of funder would be our provincial funder. So that's the Alberta Foundation for the Arts. And they have a slightly different way of assessing. They also have slightly different grant streams that you want to take a look at. The last funder that you have is the federal funder. So it arches over the entirety of Canada, and that's the Canada Council for the Arts. All 3 of these funders have wonderful websites. They're fairly user-friendly. I encourage you to take a look at them. The first place I'd like you to take a look at when you do go there to each of those different funders is to look at the objectives. You can see the different grant streams that they have, sometimes based on artistic discipline, or whether or not, as I said, individual or organization. And take a look at the objectives. What you want to do is find the right fit for your work with the right funder. It doesn't always work for every project, so it really helps to know your funder very well. I encourage you to communicate with the funder well before you make any submission, because each of those funders have different ways to apply. Sometimes they have online submissions with very specific formats of how to answer certain questions and limits on number of words. There are others, I believe Canada Council still allows Indigenous people to submit via video, for example. So if you find writing or even there's a barrier with language, you can submit your project in your own Indigenous language, and the Canada Council for the Arts will translate it for their peer assessors. It's a wonderful opportunity for Indigenous people to have eligibility in these programs. That's the next part that I'd like you to take a look at. you need to verify, before you do all of that work, verify whether you are eligible to apply. So it's important for you to take a look at each of those funders, understand that each of them have different objectives that do change from time to time. So you need to keep on top of looking at that and knowing where your projects fit in. I'd like to encourage you to really look at that's what you're doing, is you're looking for the right fit. Not every funder is the right fit for you. There are projects that I've worked on where I'm like, you know what, maybe I don't need a public funder at all. Maybe what I'm looking for is sponsorship or donors. There are also foundations that can disperse money as well, and each of them have unique application processes. So it's important that you take a look at each of those, research, understand your grant streams that you're eligible for. I encourage you to actually call them or email a grant officer. Confirm what you need to do to set up ahead of time. So for example, Canada Council for the Arts has gone through a huge consultation process and adaptation to revise how they accept grants, and they do online submissions, but you have to have a profile first, a profile with Canada Council for the Arts. So it's integral that you communicate with them first. Each of these funders have all gone through extensive consultation over the last few years. The way funds are dispersed in this country are different than they were a decade ago. And I'd have to say, things like the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, and all of the other work that both my generation and the generation before me have done to lay the ground to be fertile for you. So take some time, get to know the potential funders, take some time to understand who you are as an artist. And if you need to, establish your eligibility as an artist, you might want to take a look at some of the other Indigenous arts organizations that can verify who you are in the community. Go after letters of support, letters of commitment, letters of recommendation, and most certainly I want you to know Dreamspeakers supports you in your work. If you find you need a little extra help and support, please approach us. It's part of what we do here at Dreamspeakers. So we are looking for artists to support. Another component that you will want to consider is whether or not your project should be deemed an individual project, or perhaps a group project, or an organizational project, because each one of those opens up different funding opportunities. So you'll need to look at what project you're working on and whether or not you're going to involve other people. And if you actually have an organization, it's probably best to apply with your organization. It all depends. This is where it's really important to talk to the grant officer. Or if you need just maybe some friendly guidance, you can certainly call Dreamspeakers. We can give you a little bit of help. But at the same time, you know, there's a great wealth of knowledge those grant officers have, and they want to help you. So give them a call. So that covers, for now, how to look at your funders. The next section of this grant writing project will be your project description. Details are important. You need to know what in your project is confirmed and what might still be pending. You need to know that so that you can write that down. The people who will assess your project will also need to know, and that is partly what they'll be judging you on. So for example, you don't want to write a proposal that says, I have an idea that I want to work with some pretty big people and I think I want to pay them $1 million. If these things are not specific, it won't get funded. If you end up putting in a project just filled with ideas, and those ideas are not confirmed, or there are large sections that aren't confirmed, then the assessor might not view it as complete. It's okay to have some elements not confirmed. It's perfectly fine to say that these elements are pending, but you want to be able to articulate a good number of confirmed details, especially who's going to be working and what the goal of your project is. If you don't have those things clear, then they're not going to really be interested. So you want to make sure that you have everything confirmed as much as possible, and you want to make sure that you have people lined up ready to go. So when you are looking at your project description, you can start by going old school. The who, what, where, when, why, and how. Start with those. Another great example of how to do this is look to the language that's being used by the funder you're applying for. You'll be looking at their objectives, their goals for each grant stream, and use those same words. If you don't know for sure what those words are, look them up. Every single grant proposal I write is a learning opportunity to refine the skills that we have and articulate even better the projects that we're working on. Another part of your project description is making sure that it is succinct. Often there are limited word counts when you have your application. So you'll want to know what the word count is and then really tailor what you want to say exactly. You don't need to defend art or to indicate how important Indigenous art is because the funder already knows that. They're already an arts funder. They don't need to be convinced that what you're doing is important or that what they're doing is important. So use your time well. Make sure it's detailed, make sure you've got confirmed elements, and make it succinct. A really important part of your proposal is your budget. And all budgets are composed of at least two parts, and that is your revenue and your expenses. I'm pretty sure you know that in order to do your project, you're going to have to pay people, pay yourself, pay for expenses like production equipment, rentals, things like that. And it's great to be able to articulate all of that in a spreadsheet, but you need to be able to balance your budget with what monies are going into your project. That's the revenue component. The revenue can be a little complicated sometimes because as an artist, you might not know how you're going to pay for everything. Start first with what you understand of your project and the money that you need to pay yourself, the production, all these different elements. I like to separate my budget initially into an administrative component. That means who are the people that need to make this project work? Not necessarily the artists yet, but for example, someone who's going to keep track of the money, like a bookkeeper, an accountant, a financial officer. Next, you need to keep track of an administrative person who's going to keep track of your contracts. How do you keep all your records in place? Permits for various things. Sometimes you need those for your projects. Then we get into production, and that's things like your artist fees, your production crew fees, so your cameraman or your stage manager, your technical director, those kinds of people. An important part of the expenses is to make sure that you're not overextending the cost of things, but you're not also underselling the cost of things. You're going to look at a standardized way of paying people so that the people who are funding you feel like you're doing an appropriate job. CARFAC is one of those resources that's available online. That's CARFAC. Look it up. What it is a standardized way of paying artists across Canada for a variety of different kinds of jobs. Everything from presenting visual art to doing poetry reading, participating in a festival, doing film work, all of these kinds of things. So if you're not sure, that's a good place to start to make sure that you're doing something right. Then when you move into your revenue, you want to make sure that you have a diversified revenue stream so that your project is not dependent solely on one funder. You want to be able to look at the public funders, perhaps sponsorships, that could be corporate sponsorships, but also donations and fundraising that you'll look at, and also the in-kind contributions, hopefully from your community partners. You may be wondering, what is in-kind? What that means is that there are going to be people who want to contribute to your project but maybe don't want to exchange money. Perhaps they have a venue that you can use and they want to let you use it for free. But that free venue actually has a value. And so you'll add it to your revenue and your expenses as an in-kind contribution and an in-kind expense. And you can work with your community partners to know how to establish that value. So the next part that I want to talk about in this how to write a proposal is actually how your proposal might be assessed. You need to think about that ahead of time when you're writing it so that you can actually answer some of the questions that come up with how it's being assessed. So I've found over the years, writing many proposals and adjudicating, that means I have assessed many proposals, probably in the thousands, both municipally, provincially, and federally. And I can tell you this with confidence, every proposal, they might have different words for it, but every proposal will be looking at merit, impact, and viability. Again, they might have different words to use, but these are essentially the different ways to look at how your proposal merits, adds up against other proposals. So for example, Canada Council for the Arts will hire people like myself and other professional artists. They'll have a peer assessment jury. They'll bring them from all over Canada. They are experts in the field of whatever you're applying for. So for example, theater or music or dance, or in some cases, inter-arts, where there's multiple different kinds of arts that are going to be a part of your project. So they have experts like myself who are going to assess your grant. They're going to look at not only your project, but also potentially hundreds of other projects. And they're going to compare them. They're going to look at all of them and assign different number values to each proposal that they look at. And then at the very end, they're going to reorganize all the proposals in the order of their priority, of the highest scores that meet the highest merit, the highest impact, and most certainly the highest viability. Those are the ones that get funded. So you have to be able to look at and understand what each of those are. Merit means how important is your project? How important are you? How important is the theme of your project? And also how experienced you are. Are you, as an artist, experienced enough to pull off a big project? Some people are emerging artists and they are assessed as emerging artists. So don't worry that you're not going to go up against people who have been doing it for 1,000 years. But they're going to actually look at how experienced are you? Can you pull it off? Do you have the support that you need to pull it off? So don't be afraid to toot your own horn a little bit. Make sure that you've got your CV or your resume ready to include as part of your supporting material. Also, all of the people that are working on your project, they can also go towards the merit of your project. Make sure those people are confirmed before you emphasize that they're going to be involved. The next one would be impact. That means that this project is important not just to you, who's creating the project, but impact to perhaps your art form, your art practice, also to the people that are working on the project, the other artists who will benefit from the project, whether that will propel them into the next phase of their careers, that kind of impact. And then of course the impact to your audiences, your community. That's really important that you be able to articulate that too. The last one is viability. And that is really important. There's a lot of different ways to establish viability, but one of the primary ways is they look at your budget. Is it reasonable? Does it follow the standardized way of paying people? Use each of those only if they work for your project. The last component is viability, and this is an important one. What they're looking at is, does it make sense? Does it cost the right amount? Is your budget reasonable? Can you develop the revenue sources if there are still pending items? And how can you make sure that you go from the start of your project all the way to the end and be able to pay for everything, make sure everyone is safe and satisfied on your project. And if you can articulate that in your proposal, I'm pretty sure your viability points will go up. And never, ever, ever put someone's name down that you haven't talked to about it. So don't say, oh, I really want to get this big star to be involved in my project. Or, oh, I once talked to this institution and maybe they'll support it, and you put down that they are, because you don't know who's going to be in your assessment committee. It's happened where people have read grants from somebody else and they see their own name in a project, and right away that goes toward it not being viable because that person who's creating that project hasn't confirmed with the person whose name is on there. So that's a bit of an etiquette, but it's the one thing that could tank a really good proposal, is if you've got something in there that's not confirmed, but you've made it look like you confirmed it. So those are just some very quick ways to look at how to fund your project, how to write a proposal for funding, and how to understand how arts are in fact funded in this country. I hope it's been inspiring to you, and I hope that you can get your project off the ground. Let us know if we can help, and I look forward to seeing your art. Hi, thank you.